it right
Is
now.
that right? Okay, cool. We're recording, people. No weird words.
What'd you say?
We're recording, people. No weird words.
No weirdness now from this point on, or I'll have to cut it out. Okay. I'm going to blast it out one more time just to make sure people are aware.
Chuck, do you need what's the word? Screen access.
Yes.
Okay.
It's called screen share.
Yeah, sorry. I'm old. Just kidding.
He should got it.
I think I have it.
Okay, if you want to get that set up, I'll do an introduction. And Nick, you want us to wait 5 more minutes or?
You know what? You can go ahead and get started. I just blasted
we're
it off. I'll
recording.
keep an eye on the chat and I'm going to mute myself, okay?
Okay, great. All right, everyone, let's get started. I am here, Brandi Zamora with Fidelity National Home Warranty and Disclosure in HD. I have our very special guest and the Vice President of Disclosure Source and our circuit speaker from California, throughout California here today to go over the new home hardening law. So without further ado, it was being discussed again on the Long Beach Broker Tour this morning and also the new AB. I'll let Chuck say all of that. But Chuck's going to go over all of that right now, and I'm going to shut up and mute myself. I'll keep an eye on the chat for questions, and it's all you.
Hey, thanks, Brandi. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining this little meeting this morning. And I'll tell you, after being in the NHD industry for since its inception in 1998, I don't ever recall a more confusing new requirement as it pertains to sellers' disclosures. And so I thought I would just kind of simplify this because I just don't think this is that confusing. And that's what we want to kind of show you today, is to make this kind of an easy, simple thing. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started with this. I trust everybody can see this PowerPoint. So here we go. Home fire hardening, disclosure and advisory. Funny because disclosures are quite different than advisories, but nonetheless, this is what CAR decided to call this thing. So this new law became effective January 1st of this year. Everybody knows that. It requires the sellers to provide a disclosure regarding home features that may make the home more susceptible to fire. That's what this is all about. The disclosure is triggered by the following. It's located within a high or a very high fire hazard zone. It was built before 2010 and is residential 1 to 4. You can see this is much like the TDS. So this isn't something that you fill out. This is a form that your seller fills out. And let's just be clear about that. The form, the Home Hardening Disclosure and Advisory, HHDA, is just a one-page document that's going to require the seller to answer 6 questions specifying which home hardening features the home has that make the home vulnerable to wildfires. Hey, this is what's going to make my home vulnerable. These items I'm going to check off for you. Okay, the form is based on the seller's actual knowledge. So I put together some frequently asked questions with the help of the CAR website. So let's just go right there. First of all, just what is home hardening? Hardening your home against wildfires just means to take steps to improve the chance of your home and structures withstanding ignition by wildfires, firebrands, and flying embers. Next question, is the seller being asked to list all of the home hardening features the property has? No, quite the opposite. The seller is not being asked to disclose home hardening features, but instead is being asked to identify which features the property has that make it vulnerable to wildfires and flying embers. Again, the seller is required to read through a limited list of such problematic conditions and check all that apply. It's really pretty simple. Okay, so what are the questions that are being asked? So, I put this on here because I want you to put yourself in the position of the seller. And this is the form right here. What does it say? Seller is aware of the following features that may make the home vulnerable to wildfire and flying embers. Check all that apply. So let's look at the first one: eave, soffit, and roof ventilation, where the vents have openings in excess of 1/8 of an inch or are not flame and ember resistant. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I don't make it a habit of looking up into my roof vents to measure holes that are in excess of 1/8 of an inch. I don't know who would know that outside of an inspector. So check all that apply. I just wouldn't check it because I wouldn't know. Your seller might know. The next one: roof coverings made of untreated wood shingles or shakes. I would think everybody would probably know that. Do you have untreated wood shingles or shakes? The next one: combustible landscaping or other materials within 5 feet of the home. Well, this would include a wood pile next to the house, big weeds, combustible landscaping. Look around, you could figure that out in a couple of minutes. Oh, and under the footprint of an attached deck. So if they have an attached deck that's full of weeds underneath, that would probably qualify. You'd have to check it off. Single pane or non-tempered glass windows, loose or missing bird stoppings or roof flashing, and rain gutters without gutter covers. So those are the questions that are being asked right there. Check all that apply. So what if the seller doesn't know the answer to these questions? Seller is only required to make the disclosure using the form, the HHDA, based on their actual knowledge. The HHDA asks if the seller is aware. If the seller doesn't know, they can leave the box unchecked. Okay, is the seller required to investigate the property to figure out the correct answers? Now, this is an important question. The answer is no. Again, based on what the seller knows. Now, here's an interesting question off the CAR website. If the disclosure is not required directly under the home hardening law, could it still be considered a material disclosure and thus a required disclosure nonetheless? And I think the answer here is yes. Not that I think, this is the answer that Carr gave. And the answer is well, it's pretty ambiguous to me. If the property is located in or near, interesting word there, near, a mountainous area, forest-covered lands, brush-covered lands, grass-covered lands, or land that is covered with flammable material, a seller may choose to provide the home hardening disclosure nonetheless on the basis that it could be considered a material fact. This would also be recommended if the seller was unable to determine if the property was in one of the fire zones. Look, sellers don't look at maps. This is what an NHD company does. So this sentence makes little sense to me. In any event, a seller may always choose to deliver the disclosure voluntarily, whether or not it's mandated by law. So let's get into this a little bit more. What is the role of an NHD company in this whole scheme here? Well, it's always been to disclose if the subject property is located within various fire zones, including high and very high fire severity zones. The new thing about NHD companies now is that now an NHD company will provide a statutory notice in the report when the property is in either a high or very high fire hazard zone. Now, this is the notice. This is not the NHD company's notice. This is the notice from CAR that gets put into the report when the property is in one of these fire zones. This home is in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone, and this home was built before the implementation of the Wildfire Urban Interface Building Codes, which help to fire harden a home. To better protect your home from wildfire, you might need to consider improvements. Information on fire hardening, including current building standards, and information will be found at this website, and we give you a website. Okay, so let's look at the form, the confusing HHDA. Now, when we looked at this form, and believe me, we scrutinized this and talked about it and had our attorneys weigh in, and the confusing paragraph in this form is this paragraph right here. I just read this a second ago. Even if the property is not in either of the zones specified above. That means even if it's not in a high or very high fire zone, if the property is in or near a mountainous areas, forest covered lands, etc., a seller may choose to make the disclosures below because a buyer might consider the information material. A seller may voluntarily make the disclosures even if not mandated by law. So let's look at some wildfire facts that will help you understand why we made the decision that we made. Wildfires and the intense heat associated with these types of fires can send burning embers up into the air. Once airborne, these embers or firebrands can travel, actually it says from 1/4 to 1 mile in the wind. I think it's a lot farther than that. If these embers land on a combustible source of fuel, new fires will be started. So let's take a minute here and just listen to this little 1-minute video. Put your sound up.
All companies on record division, be advised, fire's coming.
Most people think wildfires are to blame for the destruction of homes and property. But in reality, in many cases, the culprits are the embers that are carried by the wind ahead of the real fire.
We got some stuff back up here, some embers and glows, and landed on that roof right there. It's starting on fire.
Ember showers are an undeniable threat during any wildfire, big or small. They can travel for miles to homes where they find small spaces around and inside of buildings, hiding and smoldering for hours, even days, before bursting into flames.
You can see the black smoke and the fire is spreading.
They could hide in a wood pile, behind a trash can, hunker down in the debris on your roof or in the gutters. It takes just one ember to bring a wildfire to your home, to your family. Learn about defensible space. Go to nfpa.org and click on Firewise USA.
Erratic winds and erratic fire behavior.
Be ready. It's not a question of if, but when.
Okay, so that brings this into play. If you only included that notice when the subject property was located in a high or very high fire zone according to state maps, you'd be ignoring all of the other fire zones that might affect the subject property. Now, let me show you a map to better describe what I'm talking about. This is a map from CAL FIRE, and the colors on the map would indicate the severity of the fire zone. Red would be a very high fire hazard severity zone. Orange would be high fire. Yellow would be moderate. And if it's white, then it would indicate that it's not in a fire zone. But look at all of the white spots on this map surrounded by red. For example, let's look at this little part of this map right here. What about this little area of the map? And you can see a little street that wraps in there. So on an NHD report, a house on that street wouldn't show up as being in a high fire hazard severity zone or very high, although it is surrounded by properties that have that designation, high or very high, or just even moderate. Okay, what should you do about that property? Or what do you think an NHD company should do about that property? Or what should the seller do? Because I would suggest, do you think the buyer might find this information material that they're surrounded by a fire zone? Or do you think the seller might wish to provide home hardening information if they lived on that street? And you certainly would probably have an idea of what's going on if you visited that property. So let's look at an NHD report. This comes from Disclosure Source, obviously. And we, as well as other NHD companies, provide information not only from state and federal maps, but we also draw information from local maps. So when we look at this report and we look at this property, in the center of that map, you'll see a little icon, but on the legend on the right, you can see that this property is not located in a very high fire hazard severity zone. In fact, it's not located in a fire zone at all, according to state and federal maps. But when we looked at the local maps, what did we find on that same property? The subject property is located in a supplemental or a local fire zone. So what should we do with this property? Not put the notice in? We don't think so. Again, from the HHDA, what does it say? A buyer might consider the information material. A seller may voluntarily make the disclosures, even if not mandated by law. So we at Disclosure Source made this decision, and we will include the car notice in all of our reports, whether you're in a fire zone or not. Because even if you lived a mile away from a fire zone, we think your house, like that video explained, could go up in flames because of a wildfire. Okay. And why are we putting this notice in there? Because this serves the best interest of not only your seller, but of you as the agent as well. Look, this isn't an issue of liability. This is just a heads up that's being provided by the seller via an NHD report. Okay. And what's your responsibility here? Well, I think that the conversation about home hardening is one that should take place between you and your seller. This is not a conversation between the NHD provider and the seller, but people come to you for advice. And for that reason, we're putting the notice in there because it's the right thing to do. Just remember this. This is a statement from an old wise realtor who once said, "We never get sued for disclosing too much information. It's always the other way around. So when in doubt, you should always make the disclosure." Okay. Now, before we get to any questions you might have, I just want to touch on another thing that I feel is very important when you are shopping or using an NHD company. You should know that the NHD industry is not regulated by the government. And what that simply means is that anybody, whether they're qualified or not, can jump into this industry and sell you reports. And I'll tell you, by a large majority, the providers in this industry are unqualified entrepreneurs that purchase data from data providers, and then they put that information on a template and they send it to you, and they charge you for it. They had nothing to do with the information. They purchased it from somebody else. So are they going to take responsibility for that information? The answer is absolutely not. And so what do instead? They disclaim it by way of a fine print disclaimer in the report. So it's really important to me, and believe me, to the people that you represent, that you read the fine print, because education is what you get when you read the fine print. Experience is what you get when you don't. So what is a fine print disclaimer I'm talking about? How about this one? The recipients and each of them expressly waive the benefits of California Civil Code 2778. Do you know exactly what benefits you're waiving if you use a report that has this language in there? First of all, who are the recipients of an NHD report? I've asked this question for years, and the answer I get a lot is the buyer. The buyers are not the recipients of an NHD report. The seller and the seller's agent are. They're the ones, the seller's the one who is seeking protection, seeking information, and pays for this report with the understanding that they're going to be protected, liability protection. So the recipients and each of them, seller and seller's agent, expressly waive the benefit. That who would waive a benefit? But you're waiving the benefit of Civil Code 2778. What are you waiving? You're giving up the benefit of a paid defense by the NHD provider. that means that provider can walk out of the courtroom and leave you in there because they told you in the report that you're waiving the benefit of them providing you with a defense. Okay? Who would normally waive the benefit of a defense? I would suggest nobody would do that. So again, you got to read the fine print. Okay? So a little bit about disclosure source, then we'll be done. Disclosure source is not the typical unqualified entrepreneur who purchases data from data providers and excludes liability protection with fine print disclaimers. Actually, disclosure source is a wholly owned subsidiary of Fidelity National Financial, which is a Fortune 500 company. So, I mean, come on, who would you rather have in your court? A Fortune 500 company or an unqualified entrepreneur? And don't think for a minute that lawsuits don't happen revolving around misdisclosures or non-disclosure. It happens all the time. Okay? So disclosure source among all of these companies are under the umbrella of Fidelity National Financial. And of course, serving your office and your community is Brandi Zamora. I am privileged to work with such an intelligent lady that hustles and takes care of her clients better than anybody. So with that, I will take any questions you guys might have. And let me just get out of this and stop the share and get back to you guys.
Chuck,
Any questions?
I just see one so far, and it's from Carlos Munoz, and it is, how many miles away is considered near? I know you kind of answered this already, but I know it's also one of your favorite questions.
That is a, you know, if you, anybody that can answer how far away is near, that'd be a great one to answer. I have no idea how far away is near. You know, there's an NHD company that says in their reports, the property's in the area of, and then they name a disclosure. Well, how far away is an area? I would think anything that you say describing area or near is correct. I don't know the answer to that question. That's why I found it very unusual that car would include such an ambiguous term. I can't answer that question. But for that reason, that kind of pushed us over to make that disclosure or put the notice in every report.
I also have my friend Kim on the line, and not to put her on the spot, but she is an insurance wizard, and she's from Insurance, and she's been dealing with a lot of this stuff too. Kim, do you have any questions or anything you want to kind of piggyback or add on to this?
Well, first of all, really good information, Chuck. I actually learned a few things I didn't know about the disclosures as well.
Good.
Nice.
But if you guys are talking about near, what I've been stressing with all of the agents that I'm working with is, in addition to the disclosures, the easiest way, because we're talking about the protection of the house, but at the end of the day too, if your buyers are purchasing in a high risk brush zone, you have the aspect of the insurance. So you already limit the amount of carriers you can use, and the insurance typically requires 2 policies and can be double, triple, 4 times higher than a normal homeowner's insurance policy. So the easiest way to check on that side of things is we have agents, whenever they're even showing properties in brush zones, they give us a call just to find out, because then you guys have to take into consideration slopes and all of that stuff. If the roof has wood shake shingles and stuff of that nature on it. So one of the easiest ways to figure out on the insurance side of things and the insurability side is to reach out to an agent, a local insurance agent, and they'll be able to tell you right away if it's going to cause the insurance to be sometimes astronomical. We've done quotes up to like $8,000 a year for homes and brush zones. So your buyers definitely want to know that right out the gates. So if you need anything, we're obviously here to always do quotes for that. But yeah, if you're showing in brush zones, I would definitely be proactive with the insurance.
Great.
And thank you so much, Kim. I'm gonna load some information in the chat about the new DS requirement. And Chuck, did you touch on the, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting it, guys. It's the AB, I think it's in the thing that I just posted. There's another new aspect they say that CAR released about this today. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I know what you're talking about. So the home hardening law is a 3-phase new requirement. And in July, there'll have to be documentation about defensible space around the property. And we will address that in July when that new law becomes effective, or the new requirement becomes effective. And then there's another boost in this requirement that'll take place in 2025. And if I'm so lucky to still be in the position I'm in the next 4 years or 5 years, then we'll discuss that right now. I don't want to add any confusion to what is already, I tell you, my phone has never rang as much as it has since January 1st of this year about this law. And again, it's going to be about defensible space. I want to add something to this conversation, because to me, a person that might better help a seller in this instance might be the inspector. And I would think that when you're asking questions about openings of 1/8 of an inch and the stuff around the house, who better to answer those questions than an inspector? And if I were an inspector, I would market myself, I would rebrand my service to include home hardening. And you might want to suggest that to the inspectors that you use, to have them look at this HHDA, and perhaps they can address some of these questions that are on that questionnaire. But that's a good point, Brandi. Yes, this will accelerate in a couple of months, and hopefully Nick will have us come back, and we'll touch on the expanded new disclosures.
Okay, guys. Well, as you know, on the home warranty side, I like to keep things short and sweet. Chuck keeps it in the family, keeping it short and sweet and full of great information. If there's no other questions, Chuck, do you want to put your contact info in the chat, so if anybody wants to reach out to you, they can?
Sure. Listen, I'll close with this. Whenever I'm given an opportunity to participate in a Zoom meeting, I always look at it as an audition to be a part of your team. And I'm sure that every real estate agent on this call surrounds themselves with experts, whether it be Kim with insurance, or Brandi with home warranty, or it might be your title rep, or your title officer, or your escrow officer, or your inspector, or any part of your team of experts. And I want to be a part of that team along with Brandi. And when you get questions about what's on your natural hazard disclosure report, I would caution you not to answer questions unless you are 100% sure of what you're saying. You don't want to put yourself in a libelous position by giving misinformation. I can always be that consultant for you to talk to your buyers and sellers alike who have questions or concerns about what's on an NHD report. Nothing on an NHD report should scare a buyer away. They just need it to be explained in a reasonable, common sense kind of way. Disclosures don't usually trigger added insurance unless, like Kim mentioned, if you're deep in a fire zone, or certainly if you're in a flood zone, you're going to be required to pay flood insurance, but not in all instances. Flood insurance is based on if the structure is in a flood zone. An NHD company reports on the parcel, not on the structure. But with that said, we do provide you with a flood cert that will let you know if the structure is in or out of the flood zone. And that would be the first step in getting flood insurance waived, because the structure is not in the flood zone. So anyway, I just want to throw that out there, that I'll be happy to be a part of your team and answer those questions for you. And thanks, Brandi, for putting this together. Thanks, Kim, for your addition to this discussion. And Nick, I appreciate you including us in today's meeting.
Awesome. Thanks, Chuck. All right, guys, if there's no more questions, we will call it a day. Nick, are you still there? You'll have to end the meeting for us, I believe.
That was fabulous. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys. I will stop the recording. And again, you guys are awesome.
All right, guys, have a great day.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.